Your life if you spent your 20s renting versus buying. Age 22 to 45. The first silence is a decision you make without knowing it's a decision. You are 22 years old. You have $1,400 in your checking account, a lease agreement on a one-bedroom apartment that costs you $950 a month, and a vague understanding that someday, not now but someday, you will buy a place of your own. You don't think of this as a financial strategy. You think of it as waiting until you're ready. Everyone you know is waiting until they're ready. The waiting feels responsible. It feels like patience. What it actually is, you won't understand for another 8 years. 11 miles away, someone exactly like you, same age, same salary, same city, same quiet anxiety about money, is signing something different. They're signing a mortgage. Their hands are slightly unsteady. They don't feel ready either, but they are signing anyway. This video is about what happens to both of you. Not the numbers, not the spreadsheet. The life. The machine doesn't want you to think about this clearly. The algorithm that shapes your financial identity was not designed to make you wealthy. It was designed to keep you engaged. And the most engaging financial content is the content that validates whatever you're already doing. If you're renting, the feed shows you threads about the housing bubble, predatory mortgages, the freedom of flexibility, the myth of equity. If you're considering buying, it shows you hustle culture homeowners, renovation flips, appreciation screenshots. The system does not help you decide. It helps you feel justified in whichever direction you're already leaning. That is how attention gets monetized, not through clarity, through confirmation. So most people in their 20s never actually make this decision. The decision makes itself, through inertia, through comparison, through what feels normal in the group they're closest to. And by the time they're 33 and the numbers have diverged by more than they can emotionally absorb, they tell themselves they never had a choice. You had a choice. Both of you did. The first version of you, the renter, is not irresponsible. At 22, renting is often the only realistic option. The median home price in 2024 in a mid-tier American city sits between $280,000 and $380,000. A 10% down payment on the low end is $28,000. You don't have $28,000. Almost nobody 22 years old has $28,000 in liquid savings, and the ones who do usually got it from somewhere other than their own labor. This is not a moral failure. It is arithmetic. So you rent. And for the first 2 years, renting is actually the correct financial decision. You're mobile. You take a job offer in a different city at 24 that pays $14,000 more annually. You move in 30 days. No transaction costs, no underwater equity risk, no coordination nightmare. The flexibility premium is real. Behavioral economists who study early career mobility consistently find that geographic flexibility in your mid-20s compounds into meaningfully higher lifetime earnings. Not because movement is inherently valuable, but because the willingness to move removes the ceiling from your options. This is the last time in the story that renting has the quantifiable advantage. The second silence is the year you stop thinking of your rent check as temporary. It happens somewhere around 25 or 26. You have a good apartment now. You've decorated it. You have a gym you like, a coffee shop you've claimed as yours, a commute that works. The apartment costs you $1,150 a month, which has gone up $200 since you moved in. But you signed another lease because moving is disruptive and you're busy and it's fine. You tell yourself you're still saving for a down payment. But the savings account hasn't grown in 4 months because of the trip, because of the car repair, because of the wedding you were in, because of the slow creep of lifestyle inflation that behavioral researchers call hedonic adaptation, the process by which comfort becomes the floor and former luxuries become necessities so gradually you never feel the moment it happens. The person who bought at 22 is 2 years into their mortgage. They have paid approximately $19,000 toward their loan. Of that, roughly $6,000 has gone toward principal, toward something they actually own. The rest went to interest, insurance, and property taxes. On paper, this looks worse than your rent check. It isn't, because something else has happened. Their property, in a city with moderate appreciation of 3 to 4% annually, is now worth $24,000 more than they paid for it. They didn't earn that. They just held the asset while the asset moved. You held cash. Cash does not move in that direction. At 27, you have a conversation that stays with you. A colleague, slightly older, recently bought a townhouse, mentions offhandedly that her mortgage payment is lower than your rent. You feel a flicker of something you can't quite name. Not jealousy exactly. Something more like the sensation of realizing a race started without you, and you've been standing at the starting line, thinking you were still warming up. You go home that night and open a mortgage calculator for the first time. The numbers are not reassuring. Prices have moved. Your income has moved too, but not in proportion. The down payment you would need now is larger than it would have been 2 years ago. The monthly payment on a comparable unit is higher than your rent. You close the tab. This is the moment the gap begins to widen in a way that compounds. Not because you made a catastrophically wrong decision at 27, but because every year you delay now, you are both losing the appreciation you didn't capture and facing higher entry prices on the asset you haven't bought. In markets where housing appreciates faster than wage growth, which describes most major metropolitan areas in the developed world over the last 2 decades, this dynamic is not neutral. It is a slow divergence, and the divergence has a name in economics: the wealth gap between homeowners and renters. In the United States, the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances has repeatedly shown that the median net worth of a homeowner is approximately 40 to 45 times that of a renter. Not 4 times. 40. That number is not about income. It is about the asset. The third silence is the lease you sign at 29 that you know is not temporary. You don't say that out loud. The apartment is nicer now. The building has a rooftop. You have a partner, maybe. The rent is $1,600 and it has climbed every year since you moved in. And you absorb it because the alternative, buying, now requires a down payment that represents roughly 2 full years of your post-tax income after expenses. And accumulating that while also living your actual life has proven more difficult than you modeled when you were 23 and thought saving was just a matter of wanting it enough. You are not failing. You are navigating a system that was not designed with your wealth accumulation as its priority. The rental market, particularly in the last decade, has increasingly consolidated into the hands of institutional investors, companies like Invitation Homes and large real estate investment trusts that bought single-family properties at scale during the 2008 collapse and the pandemic period, converting owner-occupant inventory into rental stock, reducing supply, and applying algorithmic rent-setting tools that optimize increases at levels just below the friction point that causes tenants to move. You are not just renting from a landlord. You are participating in a financial system designed to extract maximum monthly yield from your housing insecurity. Every rent check you write is someone else's passive income. The other version of you is 30 now. They have not had an easy 8 years. Homeownership is not the frictionless asset accumulation that social media makes it look like. There was the furnace that failed in February, $4,200 out of pocket. The roof assessment they didn't budget for. The neighbor dispute, the HOA meeting, the year property taxes increased by more than they expected. The illiquidity of it. The way you can't just leave, can't just take a better job across the country without a transaction that costs 6 to 10% of the property value in agent fees and closing costs. They have been house rich and cash poor more than once. They have had months where the maintenance costs felt like they were destroying the investment thesis entirely. But their property is now worth approximately $390,000. They paid $295,000. They have reduced their principal by roughly $28,000 through payments. Their equity, the actual number they could walk away with after paying off the loan, is somewhere between $110,000 and $120,000. That number does not count the $224,000 they have paid in rent, mortgage, taxes, and maintenance over 8 years. Neither does yours. You've paid roughly $168,000 in rent over the same period, and you own none of the asset that money touched. This is not an argument that buying is always correct. It is an observation about where the money went. The fourth silence is the one that changes you. You are 32. Your rent is now $1,900. It went up again, 6% this time, which your landlord described in the letter as in line with current market conditions, which is technically accurate and also completely disconnected from whether your income went up 6%, which it didn't. You do the math for the first time in a serious way, not a casual calculator, a real accounting. You add up every rent check you have written since 22. The number is $193,000. Then you look at what a home you could have purchased at 24, not at 22, but at 24, when you had saved enough and the job stability was there, would be worth today in your city. The number is not comfortable to look at directly. You close the spreadsheet. You go for a walk. You buy a coffee you don't really need, because the act of spending $6 on something you chose feels like control when the larger number feels like something that happened to you. This is what Robert Frank, in his work on expenditure cascades, described as compensatory consumption. Small purchases that restore a feeling of agency after a confrontation with a larger financial helplessness. The coffee is not about the coffee. The coffee is about the $193,000. At 34, the conversations shift. Your peer group, the ones who bought, begin to talk about equity lines of credit, about using the appreciation in their homes to fund renovations, investment accounts, small businesses. They are, without fully articulating it, using the asset to generate further assets. This is what Thomas Piketty documented in Capital in the 21st Century. The structural reality that when the return on capital exceeds the rate of economic growth, those who own assets accumulate wealth faster than those who generate income through labor alone. The homeowner in your friend group is not smarter than you. They are not more disciplined. They entered the capital side of that equation 8 years earlier, and the equation has been running ever since. You are still generating income. They are generating income and capital appreciation simultaneously. The fifth silence is accepting that the gap is real. Not catastrophic, not irreversible, but real. At 35, the difference in net worth between the two versions of you is not primarily about savings rate or investment skill or discipline. It is mostly about the asset. The homeowner version has equity that has compounded quietly in the background of a normal life full of normal mistakes. The renter version has paid for housing, necessary, real, non-optional. And that payment purchased shelter and flexibility and freedom of movement. And those things have value, but they don't appear on a balance sheet at 35. The Millionaire Next Door, Stanley and Danko's exhaustive study of American wealth accumulation, found that homeownership was among the most consistent behavioral predictors of long-term net worth, not because the home is always the best investment, but because it functions as a forced savings mechanism in a culture architecturally designed to make saving voluntarily extraordinarily difficult. When your mortgage payment is due, you make it. When your voluntary investment transfer is scheduled for the same week as an unexpected car repair and a concert you already bought tickets for, the investment transfer gets paused. The home doesn't pause. At 38, something unexpected happens. You buy. Not because you planned it perfectly. Not because the market timed itself for your convenience. Because your income has finally, after years of incremental progression, reached a level where the math works, barely. And you've accumulated enough for a down payment through a combination of discipline and a period of deliberate sacrifice that cost you 2 years of the social participation your peer group takes for granted. You go to restaurants less. You take 1 trip instead of 3. You stop upgrading things that still work. It is not cinematic austerity. It is the quiet, invisible accumulation of someone who finally understood the arithmetic. You buy a home at 38. The person who bought at 22 is 42 now, and their equity position after 16 years of appreciation in a market that has, like most markets over that time horizon, trended upward, is not something you will reach by 45. The gap is real. The gap is also not your entire financial story, and it is not a verdict on the choices you made in your 20s, many of which were correct given what you knew and what you had. The sixth silence is understanding what flexibility actually cost. Not what you got wrong, what you bought with the money you spent on rent. You bought mobility, and mobility gave you a career trajectory that a person locked into a mortgage at 22 in a city that didn't suit them might not have achieved. You bought the ability to leave situations that weren't working, the apartment in the bad neighborhood, the city where the industry collapsed, the relationship you would have stayed in longer if extracting yourself had also meant a property transaction. You bought time, and time, when used correctly, is the only input that compounds better than real estate. What you lost was the early entry into an appreciating asset class. What you gained was 16 years of decisions made from a position of lower structural obligation. Both of those things are real. The wealth gap between the two versions of you at 45 is real. And the question, the one that actually matters, is not which version won. It is which version of the life you are actually willing to live. The seventh silence is a number you don't say out loud at 45. You're sitting in your home, yours now, mortgage still running, equity building, not dramatically, but steadily, and somewhere across the city, the person who bought at 22 is looking at a number 2. Their property after 23 years has appreciated to something neither of you thought possible when you were 22, and thought $950 a month was a lot of money to spend on a place to sleep. They have options at 45 that are partly the product of that early decision, and partly the product of everything else they built around it, and partly the product of a market that moved in a direction that rewarded people who held assets through 2 recessions, a pandemic, and an inflationary period that destroyed the purchasing power of cash savings. You have options too, fewer of a specific kind, more of others. Here is what this story is actually about. It is not about rent versus buy. It is about the cost of the decision you don't realize you're making. At 22, you are not deciding between renting and buying. You are deciding between 2 different relationships with capital, one that puts you inside an appreciating asset system early, and one that preserves your freedom to optimize your life before committing to place. Both of those decisions have real value, but only one of them builds a balance sheet while you sleep. The machine, the algorithm, the feed, the content designed to validate your existing direction will never tell you this directly. It will show you horror stories about underwater mortgages when you're renting, and warn you about bubbles and instability. It will show you appreciation screenshots and equity porn when you're leaning toward buying. It is optimizing for your engagement, not your net worth, and engagement and net worth are not the same target. The real cost of the renting years is not the rent checks. It is the years of appreciation that ran without you inside them. The 8th silence is what $1,400 becomes. You are 22 again. You have $1,400 in your checking account. Or you are about to look, seriously for the first time, at whether there is a different document available to you. Not because you're ready, not because it's comfortable, but because the person 11 miles away who is signing that other document is not smarter than you. They are just slightly less afraid of the number. That is the whole difference. You close the calculator. You make the decision. Nobody witnesses it. That is always how it begins.